paper. Not that there were a lot of sections to analyze in the AILET paper this year. So the analysis task on behalf of the faculty here at Clat Possible perhaps is going to be much easier. There is no maths. The AR faculties just have to solve few questions. The legal faculties, again, only have to solve a few questions. So the major onus and the major responsibility of perhaps solving the paper, the AILET paper this year, lies on the shoulders of the English, logic, and the GK faculty. Okay, so that's the first impression that I have gotten. Very few legal questions. Obviously, maths was never supposed to be a part. AR, again, just like the CLAT paper, is slowly and steadily sort of becoming almost obscene, almost obsolete and redundant for the AILET paper. So that is the feedback that I have gotten from some of these students who've just come from the center and have given me certain bites about the paper. The one unanimous feedback that we have gotten from all the students across all the centers is that the paper was extremely lengthy. And of course, I have the paper as well, which really doesn't look like an exam booklet, looks more like an exam book. So wouldn't be justified to call this paper a booklet, because by any measure doesn't really look like a booklet. Just look at the sheer thickness of the question paper running into so many pages. So the paper was extremely lengthy, and why wouldn't it be when the majority of the paper only had logic and English, which is comprehension passages? It was bound to be lengthy, and you had 1.5 hours. So time management pretty much is going to play the most pivotal and imperative role in determining your success in this AILET paper. The questions, again, the faculties are solving. The first impression that I'm getting from the faculties is that the paper was definitely lengthy. However, it was not very difficult. Now, traditionally speaking, guys, there have been AILET papers, traditionally and historically speaking, has always been a bouncer. Barring a few years where the AILET paper can be termed to be an easy paper. Like I remember last year, I think for the first time in the history of AILET versus CLAT, last year was by far the only year where the AILET paper was relatively easier as compared to the CLAT paper. And I'm guessing all the students who are joining us, all the students who've been through the past year papers will agree with me that last year was by far the only year when the AILET paper was easier than the CLAT paper. Otherwise, like I said, historically speaking, the AILET paper at times has been, in fact, exponentially difficult, more difficult than the CLAT paper. So I think they're just back to the original trend, which is making a difficult paper, making a very sort of tricky paper. And this is something that they've done again this year. This year, however, Alibi, along with being slightly tricky, the paper was also very lengthy. So this was my take on the paper from the feedback that I received from other students. I am going to introduce you again to different people, different students, aspirants from Clat Possible who've taken the paper. So in the first inset box, we have students from Lucknow and Kanpur. Since Kanpur was not a center, right? Guys, Kanpur was not an AILET center, was it? Akshat, Mudit, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So Kanpur was not an AILET center. You didn't have an examination center in Kanpur.
No, sir, we
So since we did not have an examination center in Kanpur, our students from Kanpur had come all the way to Lucknow to take the paper. And thankfully, since they had come to Lucknow, they're here at the gun center. Then we have students from the Chandigarh center. Now from the Lucknow center and Kanpur center, quickly, we have Mudit, we have Akshat, we have Akshita, we have Shrishti, and I can't see the boy in the end. What's your name, beta?
The Vaibhav.
Vaibhav. So we have 6 students from the Lucknow plus Kanpur center. Then we have the Chandigarh center. And who do we have from the Chandigarh center?
Sir, I am Aditya.
I am Akshat.
All right. And then we have the Prayagraj center. Prayagraj center, please turn on your mic and camera. We have Patna as well. Students, please identify yourself. Patna center.
Sir, I am Harsh Raj.
I am Rishi Raj.
Okay, so we have Harsh Raj and Rishi Raj. Prayagraj, we have, who do we have from Prayagraj?
This is Pranav from the Prayagraj Center.
All right, so Pranav from Prayagraj, and we have Guys, Delhi Center, I think you need to invert your camera. You're all upside down. I know the paper was tricky and difficult, but I mean, I don't think this is the way to express it, guys. You are all upside down. All right, okay.
Is it better now, sir? Abhishek, sir?
It is much better, Nikhil. It is much better now. All right, okay. So let's start with the first impression session. Then let's start with the Lucknow Center. By the way, guys, before we go ahead with the session, let me tell you, we've had fantastic results in the CLAT paper this year. All our audience live on YouTube and other social media platforms. We've had All India rank 3, we've had All India rank 5, we've had close to 10 ranks in the top 100. So this year has been a year of absolutely awesome and amazing results for us here at Clat Possible. And I have a very staunch and strong feeling that we will replicate the sort of success we had in the Clat paper, in the Aylate paper as well. So more from the horse's mouth, more from the students themselves. Let's start with Ganj. General feedback. Let's start with the general feedback. Yes, Mudit, let's start with you. General feedback of the Aylate paper, shockers, bouncers, everything.
Yes, sir. The general feedback from my side won't be any different.
Can you turn up the volume? Can you turn up the volume? Is there a volume tab on the screen? Maybe come
Yes,
closer
sir.
to the... Yes. Mudit, go ahead. You're audible now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying that general feedback would be more of the same. Healthy. 9 passages in English and logical also.
Guys, hold on, Mudit. Rest of the centers, is Mudit audible to all of you? Chandigarh, Patna, Prayagraj, can you all hear Mudit?
Mudit is not audible.
No, his voice is very
Mudit,
feeble.
yes, Mudit, you're not audible. Just hold on. Give me a second. Just give me 1 second. All right. Okay. So let us, in the meantime, start with Chandigarh. Yes. Who do we have from Chandigarh? All right. Okay. Yes. Go
Hello?
ahead, guys. Yes. General feedback. Yes. General feedback of the AILET paper, bouncers, anything, any surprising thing? How did you handle the paper? Go ahead.
So what I think about the paper is that one, it was a very lengthy paper, and second is that we kind of knew that there are going to be some bounces because they did not release any sample paper, right?
Yes.
So we were kind of assuming that there is going to be a mixed bag in terms of AR, CR, and legal in the logical section, but majority of the entire paper was critical reasoning and some bits and pieces of AR and CR. As far as the English section is concerned, so traditionally AILET has asked you like grammar and vocab questions, but this time we kind of saw a trend that they have shifted like more towards like a CLAT pattern, which was reading intensive. But the problem there was that they did not stick to say like a uniform number of questions per passage. Some passages probably had 7, 8 questions, and some passages also had probably 2 or 3 questions. So, and as far as the GK section is concerned, we were kind of assuming, and because of the last year, we were kind of assuming that they might shift to probably a easier section with GK, which would probably be more relevant. But they have gone with the previous trend where they're asking authors and prizes and ranks in the
Yes.
So overall, I think the paper was like the previous years. I mean, being 2021 being an exception, though it was very lengthy.
All right. Who's next to you?
Akshat.
Yes, Akshat. What's your take on the paper? How did you find it?
It was a
Surprise
lengthy paper,
element.
sir. In the logic, the options were very close. So it took time to eliminate the options.
All right. And what about the difficulty level of this? Since majority of the questions in the logic section were critical reasoning, what about the difficulty level of the passage? Now, this is again a feedback that I'm getting from a lot of students that the option were close. But how were the passages per se? Were they convoluted? Were they complex? Or easy reads?
So I think that with respect to the CR, like traditional CR questions, they were actually taken from, I think, newspapers, and they had like kind of relevance with what's going on in the world. But I just feel that, yes, because probably of the timing, you were kind of, you always had that thought in mind that so many questions are left. So you probably did not give enough time per question that was probably needed out of you.
All right. So, I mean, obviously, the general consensus here is that the paper was quite lengthy, and the majority chunk of the paper was logic. Now, one point which obviously which bothered everyone before they took the AILET paper was that the AILET never released any sample paper, so nobody kind of knew what exactly they'd be facing today. And what they ultimately faced today, I wouldn't say was an absolute shocker, but was a bit of a surprise. So, for example, there was no separate head for legal questions. So, a lot of aspirants did think that the logic section is going to incorporate the legal section. It did, but with very few questions. All right. So, since logic section was by far the biggest chunk of the paper, let's start with the logic section itself. Chandigarh tells me that the options were closed. Chandigarh also tells me that the passages per se were easy reads. Let's come to the Delhi Center now. Logic section. By far the most discussed and the most important section of this year's AILET paper. Delhi, who do we have? Please start identifying yourself. Nikhil, can you help these boys come in the front and... yes.
Yes, Abhishek sir. So with me are 4 or 5 students of Clat Possible, and all of them have scored very well in Clat last week. So All India rank 603, All India rank 1300, 1400. This is the kind of rank that they have scored. And today the overall general feedback that they gave me was that the paper they found to be a bit lengthy. I'll pass on the mic to them. With me is Rhea. So she'll tell you about logical section. How did you find the logical section?
As compared to the legal section, logical section was a bit much. It was also unexpected because we expected that legal and logical would have generally like equal balance
number
in
of
the
questions. Yes,
exactly. I also found out that the deductive logic questions were more in critical reasoning. That's it. According to me, paper overall was lengthy. The passages in English also I found them a bit lengthy. GK, according to me, was doable and like easy. So that is my.
All right. Coming to the boys, so the logic section again, there are some of the students who also say that the options were really close. Now, that is something obviously we'll only get to know once we come up with the analysis, section-wise analysis, and once we, sort of mark the correct answers for these questions. But the passages per se, were they easy reads or were they also a bit convoluted? How did you find the difficulty level of the passages? Yes. What's your name?
Sir, good afternoon, sir. My name is Harshil. I found the passage to be easy as per the reading, and the most of the question, the logical reasoning section contained majority of questions based on syllogisms and assumptions. So those were a bit of easy questions. However, legal questions were less in number, but they were very easy to attempt.
So what do you think about the same, Chirayu?
Sir, I believe that the English section was pretty much lengthy, but it was the most easy section in the paper. We need to change the approach according to the needs of the paper. The logical section was easy. There were some close options, but it could be eliminated if we manage the time properly.
Were the passages lengthy?
Sir, the passages were not so lengthy in English paper, but they were more. Actually, English section had somewhat 8 to 9 passages. So we had to increase our time limit to some extent so we can manage our time properly. It was all about time management, I believe.
All right. Now, for the logic section, obviously the general feedback here is that there were way more deductive logic questions. So coming to Pranav from Prayagraj, so is it like a welcome change in the logic section rather than having more questions on, assumptions and presumptions and strengthening, weakening? You have more questions on deductive logic, which is closer to analytical reasoning. How do you find this change? I mean, is it a welcome change? Would you rather want more questions, like the CLAT asks you on inductive logic, on assumptions? Your take, Pranav.
Sir, actually, I feel that this was not a paper in which you should have looked like which are the easy questions. Like there were easy questions, which I was sure that I might get the correct answer, but I had to spend more time on them. Rather, this was a paper in which you had to look at which are the questions which will consume the least amount of time.
Okay, that's a good, interesting take, Pranav. Yes,
it was required to skim through the entire sections. And another thing that came as a bit of surprise for me was that while writing the mocks of this of Clat Possible, we had the questions bifurcated. Like in the logical sections, also the first 10 questions used to be CR. Then we had assumptions. Then we had deductive logic. Then we had in there towards the end we had 22, 25 questions of legal reasoning. But here it was all jumbled. So what was required to like set the paper in a group of 10 questions and skim through them. Otherwise, if you spend a lot of time in doing a particular set of questions, like there are 10 CR questions, I have to solve them all. That will take a lot of time. And that was not available. Properly saying, this was not a 1.5 hour paper. Like it should not have been it was quite lengthy paper. So it was just required to skim through the paper.
All right, so Pranav has an interesting take. I will come to the gun center and ask the students what was their approach for the logic section in the Clat AILET paper that you've just gotten done with. Akshat, what do you think was the best approach? I mean, best approach is again a very relative term. Let's start with what was your approach for the logic section. How did you go about the section?
So like for the logic section, since there were a lot of deductive questions, it was better to first directly come to the deductive questions rather than solving the questions required.
Hold on, Akshat. Is Akshat audible, guys? Is
No,
Akshat audible?
no, not audible.
Not audible. Akshat, hold on. Give me a second. Give me a second. Give me 1 second.
Am I audible now?
Hold on. Yes, Akshat, can you start talking again? Can you start speaking again?
Audible now?
Your voice is cracking. I think the tech team guys are with you. We'll give you a couple of seconds maybe to work on the mic. In the meantime, I'll come to the approach. Patna, Harsh. So Harsh got a great rank in the Clat paper as well. So I think the aspirants would be interested in knowing what was your approach for the logic section of the paper. Yes, Harsh, start. How did you find the section? What was your approach?
So after going through the paper at the start of the exam, I thought, so am I audible?
Yes, Harsh, perfectly audible.
So I thought I should start with the logic section. It was quite eccentric because in none of the mocks I started with logic. I always started with English. So seeing so many passages in the English section took me by surprise, to be very honest. I did not expect that AILET is not going to ask any questions on grammar, sentence correction, figures of speech, synonyms, antonyms, or any kind of one-liners. They did not ask a single question on grammar or anything objective in English. So I thought I should go for logical reasoning section because it is also the tiebreaker. GK was along the lines of previous year questions only. Some of the questions in GK I found to be quite interesting in the sense that they seem to be more like a KBC question, like which of the following is not a film by Satyajit Ray.
Yeah, and very unlike the Clat section. It was more definitely like a one-liner MCQ sort of a section. The sort of questions that we got in the old pattern of the Clat examination. Yes, so since we started the discussion with the GK section, at the Delhi Center, we have Nikhil, alumnus of NLU Jodhpur and faculty here at Clat Possible, who mentors students, and he teaches GK and GK and legal. So let's start with Nikhil. Nikhil, you have spoken to a lot of students from different centers, and they're very thankful to you, firstly, for helping them with the GK section. What is your take? How did you find the GK section, surprising elements? So quickly from the faculty himself, and then we'll come to some of the students.
So the first impression, Abhishek sir, when I saw the paper and the GK section was that the questions were very, you can say, straightforward. Either you know the answer or you don't. They weren't time consuming. You didn't have to read a lot. The options weren't very confusing or they weren't very lengthy, unlike the CLAT pattern. So this was very much expected that one word answers would be there in the GK section. The feedback that I'm getting from all the students over here, so Chirayu over here just mentioned that roughly 12 to 13 questions in GK out of the 30 he was able to answer based on the YouTube videos of Clat Possible channel and the other things that we had covered. So there were some very basic questions like the members of quad, which amongst them is not a member. So questions like these were, since many of the students were complaining that the paper is a bit lengthy because of the critical questions being there. So questions like these can make up for the lost time and you can quickly know the answer by just without even having a look at the options. Similarly, Thomas Cup, that was in news, a question related to that was also asked, which country has won it for the maximum number of times. As again Harsh was just mentioning, there were certain questions that were very static in nature, or you can say who was the first woman judge of USA. So a question like this is a little difficult to answer for a 12th class level aspirant, because you would know the first female judge of India, you would perhaps know the first female judge of Pakistan, but to remember the first female judges of countries like USA is a little difficult according to me. But then again, I would like to hear and I would like to give the opportunity to the students share themselves how they found the GK section. So with me is Clat Possible student Ashmit, who secured All India rank of 603. And how did you find GK, Ashmit?
GK was, as you said, it was very straightforward. It merely took some time of mine in the paper. Like some of the questions I knew straightforward, and some of them I have never heard of them. I had barely an idea what the answer could be. So GK didn't take much of my time. For me, it was an okay-ish section. Not a very, I don't expect a very good score from it, but not a very bad one too. Yes, some of questions like the US women judge was something that I just, in matter of seconds, I skimmed through it because I didn't know the answer to. So,
all right.
But there were certain questions, Ashmit. There were certain questions like the first emergency landing strip. It was inaugurated in which state? Were you able to answer questions like these that you had studied during Clat Possible classes?
Yes, sir. Like questions like these and questions like Squad and Quad Summit and Pulitzer Prize questions.
So there were questions, Abhishek sir and other students, regarding awards, prizes like the Pulitzer Prize, who recently won it. Another good thing and another observation that I noted when I saw the paper for the first time is that we have a basic tendency that we stop studying for current affairs as soon as the month in which the exam is to be held approaches. For example, it's June going on right now. So we have a tendency that June questions or current affairs won't be asked. But surprisingly, in today's paper, many of the questions that were asked were not even 30 days old current affairs. So one important thing that we can learn from this today's paper is that we cannot take the risk of leaving current affairs, you can say 30 days, 1 month before the exam date. We should most probably reduce the amount of intensity with which we should do the current affairs for the last month, but still we should know the basic events. We should definitely cover it.
All right. That's a very interesting take by Nikhil. He says that, I mean, this is something that obviously students have been asking since, the past 7-8 years, as far as I can remember, where once we had the online papers, you would have gotten questions, dating back to, let's say, just a week. With offline papers, it's also 20-25 days right into the papers. So definitely don't stop studying your GK in the month of your examination for all the future aspirants. Coming to the gun center now. Finally, I hope you're audible. Yes, Nikhil.
Yes,
Abhishek sir, if you would allow me just 1 more minute. So one more observation based on the feedback that these students shared about the GK section, was that either you knew the answer within the first 5 seconds without even looking at the option, or you again knew that you couldn't take the risk of wasting any other seconds on this question. You leave it altogether. So I would just like Chirayu to share what did he feel about the GK section.
Sir, I believe the GK section was quite weird this time. Or if anyone has studied from YouTube videos of Clat Possible channel, he would surely be answering minimum 13 to 14 questions directly, and 4 to 5 questions were like that, which could be solved using elimination method and by using general awareness. So I believe the GK section was quite tough, but it was doable. Either you will get full marks for it, or either if you do blind guessing, you may lose your precious marks.
All right. Thank you so much, Chirayu. Moving on to the gun center. I hope you guys are finally audible. Hazrat
Are we audible? Are we audible?
Yes, much better now. So, Akshat, you were cut short when you were talking about the approach you took for the logic section, by far the most important section of the paper. So you can take it on from there and then perhaps move on to the GK section.
Yes, so like in the logical section, a better approach would have been to first pick up the deductive reasoning questions, because they're more straightforward and you can be more accurate with that, as compared to in the case of like those assumption questions or paragraph based questions. And even in the case of like the legal questions which were asked, they were pretty straightforward, most of them. So that's the thing. And if like someone started from the logical section, like, because everyone has a different approach. Some people begin from the English section, some from the logical. So if someone had started from the logical section, I think that would give them a lot of advantage, because the questions were easy in the logical section. Is just that because usually we start from English and then GK and then logical. So English ate up a lot of time and we were not left with a lot of time in the logical section. So that was a problem. So it was more about time management on the spot, that, okay, this question is lengthy, so I'll leave it. I'll come back to it later. I'll finish the easy questions first. So I think
what was your order of sections, Akshat? What order did you follow?
I also went with the conventional method, that is English, GK and logical. But what I did was that in the logical section, I was not going serial wise, because the questions were jumbled up. Like it wasn't as if they'll ask one topic questions first and then the second topic and then the third topic. There was a lot of jumbled up things. So I would skip questions in between. That I'll not do this. I'll come back to it later. Then I'll finish the easy questions. The syllogism questions were easy enough, so those could be tackled earlier.
And were you able to come back to the questions you left?
Yeah, I was able to come back to the questions that I left. So I had a pretty good attempt in the logical section at least.
All right. So this is a question that I very frequently get, that what should be the order of sections? And obviously, I mean, no one shoe size fits everybody. You know, a lot of people start with the GK session because it takes, it consumes very less time. But then if you're not good with GK and you don't get a lot of questions right, then you sort of lose your morale right in the middle of the paper, which is why a lot of people say, let's start with legal, then logic. But then again, so a question to all the aspirants, all the people who've taken the AILET paper, if you have been sticking to a particular order and it has worked for you in the mocks, should you usually follow that order, or should you kind of introspect the paper and maybe change the order with respect to the kind of paper that you have gotten? Yes, let's come to Lucknow for this answer. Shrishti.
So I would definitely say improvise, because we can never predict the paper. Like, we can never predict the paper. I did it with Clat too, because my decided order was usually like doing the legal first, and then I would come back to RC and CR at the end. But in the actual Clat, I did RC and CR in the middle, and I finished with another section. And in this paper, this was definitely required, because doing logical gives an advantage in this paper.
So what was your order, Shrishti?
Sir,
order of approaching the different sections?
Which one we have to?
Sorry, Ganj, am I audible?
Yes, sir. So which Srishti do you want? We have two Srishti and Srishti.
Well, I'm forgetting the surnames. I think it is Pandey. One is Pandey and the other is Agarwal.
Yes, sir.
Yes, so let's start with Agarwal and then we'll move on to Pandey.
So I spoke about the basic, and I did the sections in the order: logical, then GK, then I did the English. And I had low attempts in English because I focused more on logical because I could get a higher accuracy there. And I'm pretty good with AR. So I could AR a few questions and deductive. I could finish them in almost no time. So that was really good for me.
All right. General Shrishti Agarwal again, a general take on the logic section in terms of difficulty, and a lot of people are telling me that the options were close. So a quick word on the general difficulty level of the logic section.
Sir, not all questions were difficult. The whole section would be moderate because a lot of questions were really easy to, like by elimination, you could reach to the answer within minutes, like within a minute. I'm sorry, not within minutes, within a minute. And a few questions were tough, but you could probably leave them or mark your best shot. There was no use spending a lot of time wondering what the answer was because we could eliminate 2 options at least in all questions.
All right. So basically, the game was between the remainder 2 options in majority of these questions. What about the English section, Shrishti? I mean, a lot of people are telling me that AILET deviated from its established trend of asking a lot of vocab and grammar questions, and they have sort of taken the Clat approach of asking more questions based on passages. Was it a welcoming change, and how did you approach it?
So it was definitely not a welcome change to me because honestly, my allotted time for English is really low and I can easily finish with it and gain a higher accuracy. But that was not the case here. I tried to do the passages which had the maximum questions. Like there were 1 or 2 passages with 9 questions, 8 questions. There was one passage with even 10 questions, I think. So I did those first.
Yes. There were a lot of variable questions per passage.
Also, I picked out the grammar kind of questions and a bit vocab was there. So I did those in the other passages.
All right.
I did not attempt all passages.
Okay. And finally, Shrishti, GK section. Like a lot of people are telling me a very traditional section akin to, a lot of these government service exams where you had one-liners and dates and stuff like that. So, I mean, the way you were taught, were these questions also covered? Was there a slight difference between your strategy, how you prepared GK for Clat versus what came in the AILET? What was the difference?
So the strategy was really different. I did one-liners for AILET mostly because that was what was expected. But I was a bit underprepared for the one-liners because I was focusing more on Clat. And the one-liners were a bit unpredictable. Like about 15 questions, you could honestly say that they were easy and you could do them on the spot. You did not have to wonder about the answer. But at least like 5 to 6 questions were very weird. Like I did.
Okay, not exactly difficult, but sort of out of the blues.
Yes, sir.
All right. Let's come to Shrishti Pandey now. All right. Yes. All right, Shrishti. So let's start with let's take up the GK section. Did you prepare separately for the AILET GK or was it clubbed? And how did you find the GK section?
Sir, I think the GK section was a bit out of blue, like everyone said, and I did not prepare for AILET per se, but it was definitely like we were told ki compendiums and all in one-liners. If you cover up, then about 50% of it could be covered. But I think a lot of the questions were weird and they were out of the box. So it was not really possible for us to cover it even through the compendiums or the one-liners. Even we did other GK today and all of that, but it was not really covered in those as well. So GK was a bit out of the box. I would say the level was pretty moderate.
All right. And what about the English section, Shrishti?
So the English section, actually, my strategy was to pick up the passages which had a lot of questions, like the passage which had 10 questions and then a passage which had 8 questions and all of that. So covering those was a better choice first, so that you can just read one passage and cover up more questions rather than reading. There was one passage with 3 questions, so it was not advisable to do that first because then you'll only cover 3 questions.
True, very good strategy.
One thing
very
was
good.
to skim through. So one thing was to skim through the whole English section and just pick up the passages which had more questions for English section, though it was doable. but lengthy.
All right. All right. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Now, obviously, let's come to, not exactly shockers, but then there was an aberration from the established pattern in the sense that you really did not have a lot of legal questions. AR, anyways, becoming pretty much redundant for the paper. It has become so for the Clat paper, and the same is sort of being replicated in the AILET paper as well. So, I mean, not having a lot of legal questions, obviously, for the Clat paper, since that is the most important section, you prepare a lot. Feedback, disappointed. All right, let's come to Patna. Harsh, not having a lot of legal questions, did that disappoint you, or you feel like that was the right thing to do?
So I am a bit disappointed because I had prepared extensively for grammar and vocab for English. And in logic section also, there were very few questions based on analytical reasoning and one line like that. So I'm a bit disappointed because it plummeted my number of attempts. So I'm a bit disappointed.
All right. Okay. Chandigarh. Since we did not have any sample paper, what you finally got, the disappointments and the things that you appreciate or welcome.
So one thing I'm kind of disappointed about is that, I mean, because it's like a law entrance test, I do believe that certain legal questions, and so I mean, at least like 15, 20 questions should be asked based on probably legal aptitude, if not legal knowledge, right? Because otherwise it just makes it just looks like that it's a any day government exam which asks you English, logical, and GK. So that was probably one disappointment. But the good thing is that because there was no sample paper, I just think that everybody was on the same board. So improvisation was probably the best thing to do here.
True. Pranav, since again, same question, no sample paper for the first time, we have this paper on the new pattern, disappointments and things that you appreciate in the new pattern.
So one thing was that while we were writing the mocks, we had a certain time specification for each section. Like personally, I used to start with GK, and my GK was over in about 7 to 8 minutes. And then I would go with English, and by I had about 50 minutes or 1 hour left for the logical section. But this was not something that would work in today's paper. Because the English section was extensively lengthy. And like 50 RC questions, it means a lot.
True, definitely.
It can't be done in 30 minutes. So the best strategy is that you find out, like, there were some questions which did not even require reading of the passage to solve them. And every passage you would find such questions. So the strategy which I use today, I don't know whether it would work or not, but which I used today was that I picked out those questions which did not require the reading of the passage, and first I did them. Then I saw that my attempts were going okay. Like in each passage I had about
Pranav, I think you're muted.
Sorry. So on this point, making is something that would work the best.
Okay.
You can't be prepared for that. You can't be prepared for that prior to the paper. It doesn't matter how many mocks you write. What you require is a good decision making on the day of the exam.
Makes a lot of sense, Pranav. We have Ilma as well. Ilma, can you please turn on your mic and camera? We have Ilma Afsar from the Allahabad Center, secured a rank of AIR 9090. Ilma, can you please turn on your mic and camera?
Good afternoon, sir. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Ilma. Ilma, your take on since we haven't spoken to you, your general take on the AILET paper, and most importantly, first time you're writing the paper on the new pattern, the things you found disappointing and the things that you would appreciate about the paper.
Sir, I think everyone pretty much covered the paper. It was a moderate paper and it was kind of lengthy, so you were required to be quick and improvise in between and not spend time on the lengthy questions or the questions that were there to trap you or to, stop you. So,
Ilma, I think you're muted. Please unmute. All right. I think we have some signal issues with Ilma's connection. All right. Anyway, guys, now let us come to the last part of this session. Now, first things first, NLU Delhi is definitely one of the best law schools out there. I remember when I started working here at Clat Possible, in the initial few years, the debate was, sir, I've cracked NLU Delhi and I've cracked Jodhpur or Bhopal, where should I go? Then the next year, the debate sort of changed and it was more like, I cracked Calcutta and I cracked Delhi, where should I go? Then the next year, the debate changed and it was more like, I cracked Nalsar, I had cracked NLU Delhi, where should I go? And then finally, the debate is, I've cracked NLS and I have cracked NLU Delhi, where should I go? And now obviously I'm seeing people who've cracked both, and some of them are actually taking up NLU Delhi over NLS Bangalore as well. So needless to say, the college has done great in the past few years. Obviously locational advantage, the students are performing really well, but all reasons come together and it has become one of the most sought after law schools in the country. So the preparation for AILET, it might be, a separate entrance, but people are equally interested and work equally hard because it is tied, frankly speaking, with the first, rank one law school in the country. That being the case, the most common question that I get, and now that the sort of pattern is clear, I mean, for all we know, the next year the pattern changes, but now we have at least something to look forward to as to what sort of AILET paper would we be getting in the next cycle. The most common question that I get from students is, how does your strategy for CLAT and AILET, how does it have to be different? So for all the future aspirants who are attending this session, a quick word on how my students distinguished their prep strategy for the CLAT paper versus the AILET paper. So let's start with Ganj and let's start with Mudit. Mudit, what are the things that overlap and what are the things that you need to do differently for the AILET paper that will obviously be most fruitful for the AILET exam?
Yes, sir. Sir, not taking into account this year's paper, like the preparation all of us did, it would not focus much on reading. And GK mostly one-liners and the news in short sections on the YouTube. But now that they have started giving RCs in English and some irrelevant topics.
Which, Mudit, is a good thing, because now if logic and RC is more like the CLAT paper, that means there is no extra effort required. And your prep for the English and RC section, logic section for CLAT is pretty much going to cover the base for the AILET paper as well. Yes or no?
Yes, sir. That I agree. That English is like mostly same. The 1000 RC PDF that we have, the questions in this year's paper were mostly like that. Like 7-8 questions, small passage, but 7-8 questions, and you have to think between two options and those sorts of questions. And CR, it was mostly same. Like they jumbled the questions, like a statement assumption question, you will just see like 2 here and then 2 after another 15 questions and 3 after another 10 questions. So they have jumbled it.
Coherence was missing. Coherence was missing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There was no coherence in the paper, and GK was mostly same. Like GK, one-liners, and I would say that they were like the topics were a bit irrelevant. Like why are you asking Satyajit Ray's films? I can't comprehend that.
Well, the CLAT asked you what was the profession of the Ukrainian president, so not much of a shock. All right.
So
okay.
The difference in preparation would be in GK mostly. Like now they are giving RCs in English, so that would be covered. CR was, the concepts of CR were the same. Like you had to do assumptions and inferences, and the concepts are same to crack the CR section in both CLAT and AILET, but GK would still remain different. Like one-liners.
But correct me regarding the logic section, since it's the most important section. Clat is more passage-based centric, and this current AILET paper was more deductive logic centric. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, sir. Yeah, you are correct. And yeah,
less deductive logic as compared to the concept-based CR and paragraph-based CR, but they
Yes,
were there.
Srishti.
Like a little bit of practice of deductive because it's a fairly easy concept you could do, and a little bit of AR arrangements. That's all that's needed in addition to class. Otherwise, you all study the concepts of CR.
So in total, basically combining both the CLAT and the AILET paper, logic actually becomes the backbone of your preparation in a way. It does. It does. It does. Okay, that's the general take. Yes.
In GK also, like since CLAT is very unpredictable, so for that as well, we even go through the one-liners as well, very basic questions as well, and those one-liners can also be covered in AILET. So as far as GK is concerned, the prep is somewhat the same. Although, like as last year, we saw that they had asked a lot of questions from the previous month. Like the AILET happened, and from the previous month, there were a lot of questions. So the compendium covered it very nicely. But this time it was more of a general knowledge rather than current affairs. Like general knowledge questions were there, like regarding the revolt of 1857 and stuff like that. So that's a lot of general knowledge. Like if you know it, you know it. If you don't, then you don't.
So I mean, this is again, let's have some clarification from the GK faculty himself. Nikhil, for the sort of one-liners that you got in the AILET paper versus the passage-based questions in the CLAT paper, how different should be the approach for both these papers? What overlaps and what is different? What should be the difference in terms of approaching the CLAT GK and AILET GK?
So, Abhishek, my take on this would be that ideally one should prepare for the kind of GK that is asked in CLAT. And that overall makes a foundation for the entire AILET as well as other law entrance exams GK as well. What specifically needs to be done in addition to the CLAT GK for AILET is that you should build a foundation of static GK, like all the important awards, lists about them, all the important, you can say, geographical locations, things. Because last year, I remember there was a question about the largest delta in the world. Okay, so the answer to something like this, we have covered it in our school textbooks, Sundarbans and other things. It's just that we have done it, but it's not in our active memory. Now, certain questions like important prominent books by Satyajit Ray, or for that matter of fact, from important freedom fighters like Jawaharlal Nehru's discovery of India or Mahatma Gandhi's experiments with truth. These are certain things that AILET has been focusing on. And for AILET, in addition to the CLAT GK, if one is able to figure out the important books, the important, you can say, days, important geographical things like highest peaks, important active volcanoes, important straits, seas in news, it will be something that will help a lot. Apart from it, if there is a news from CLAT perspective that we do in depth, for example, there was some very good emergency airstrip that was there in one of the states of India. In CLAT, we would study at least 5-6 different things about it. But from AILET perspective, it would specifically be which state, which district, what was the length, what was the number of that national highway. Things like these are AILET specific preparation. My take would be that since I know that initially when you said it rightly that initially it used to be whether Jodhpur or Delhi, when I cracked both, it was a dilemma that I faced. Now it is whether it is Bangalore or Delhi. AILET is as important as CLAT, but then we have to be very practical also, sir, about it. On one side, there is an exam for which if you prepare the GK, if you prepare all the sections, you have the possibility of getting admission in one of the 22 NLUs. And mind you, a couple of more NLUs are coming up in the next few years. On the other hand, there is an exam which is equally tough, equally competitive, yet the number of seats are very, very limited. So one cannot just focus primarily on AILET and then perhaps do some additional things for CLAT. It should be the other way around. CLAT should always take the predominance. And AILET should be something for which we can complement the preparation by adding a few static topics to it, like the first female pilot of India, first female judge of India, first female judge of USA also after seeing today's paper. So things like these will help somebody.
In fact, that is what I keep telling. I think the utopian situation would be when there is the least addition that you need to separately make for AILET preparation as compared to the CLAT preparation. If we can sort of achieve a state like this where the preparation is synchronized pretty much for both the entrances, then that would be quite ideal. I think the AILET is approaching the CLAT paper, the logic section, the English section, and the GK section. Again, if you prepare for these passage-based questions, a lot of it is already covered. So I think they're moving in the right direction. It is definitely, because if you ask about the old pattern of the AILET and the new pattern of the CLAT, I think there was a lot of extra effort that you would have to put in for the AILET paper. But with the new pattern, I think that gap has somehow been bridged. To some extent, definitely it has been bridged. So I think that would be all for this session, guys. And thank you so much. So many of these people already have great CLAT ranks, and which is why I'm guessing that they sort of took the AILET paper, without a lot of pressure on their heads. So I hope that they get great results, and all the best, guys. You guys have worked really hard pretty much with the AILET paper. Your prep cycle comes to an end, and all the best for the counseling session. I hope you get the college that you've been eyeing, and if not, again, there is always another time. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this session. Yes, Nikhil.
Add something to all my students joining me for the session. So I just enjoyed the whole session that you conducted so nicely, and you understood what these students had to share as the first impressions of this paper. One thing that I would like to remind all the Clat Possible achievers and students who have joined here today right after giving this highly competitive exam, AILET, is that when All India rank 70 student like Harsh, he feels that he was a little disappointed with the paper. At the same time, I would like to assure all of you students that just last Sunday, when you had written CLAT, I specifically remember that perhaps your first take about the paper wouldn't have been that positive. Some of the students were a bit worried that perhaps 2 passages regarding corporate social responsibility, another about drones, was totally out of the blue. Yet the kind of result that Clat Possible students achieved on June 24th, it goes on to show that if there is something lengthy for you, it is extremely lengthy for all the other mediocre aspirants. If something is disappointing you, or if something is you are feeling it to be weird, it is extremely weird, therefore eliminating the non-serious competition outrightly. So it's a good thing that the paper, if it's not a bad thing that your paper didn't go well, you found the paper to be a little moderate or difficult or lengthy. If it was for you, it was for everyone else. And that is the whole purpose, Abhishek sir, I feel, of this impressions session, because after attending the session, we all are able to conquer that whatever the aspirants in Chandigarh felt, the same was felt by Delhi people, the same was felt by Hazratganj, Lucknow Clat Possible students. So therefore, there is a consensus amongst all the aspirants. And my best wishes are there with all of you. May you all get the dream law school of your choice. Many of the students joining here, they already have bagged excellent ranks. And I'm pretty sure with the kind of grit and determination that they have written this AILET also, they will surely be able to reach NLU Delhi also if they aspire to. Thank you so much, and all the best to all.
Thank you so much, Nikhil. And this is, I completely concur with Nikhil. In fact, this is something that I keep telling my students as well, that, don't have a nervous breakdown right in the middle of the paper, because if you have prepped hard, trust your preparation. If you find the paper difficult, it's not just difficult for you, but it's difficult for everybody who's taking the paper. So trust your prep, and all the best with the results. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much. And all the best with the results for AILET. Bye, guys. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.